You're watching a man die in real time, and the only person in that room who knows how to stop it is the one everyone spent the last 6 hours ignoring. The monitor is screaming. The attending physician is frozen at the door. The charge nurse has already called it in her head. You can see it in the way she stopped moving, the way her hands dropped to her sides like she'd already let go. And there, bent over the bed in the pale blue light of a VA hospital ward at 2 in the morning, is a woman in plain scrubs, a woman nobody in that building knows anything about, doing something with her hands that has no business being done in a civilian hospital room. She is pressing 2 fingers into a specific point along the patient's ribcage. Not guessing, not improvising, moving with the kind of muscle memory that only comes from doing something in the dark, in the dirt, under fire, when the wrong move means a body bag instead of a breathing man. The monitor steadies. 1 beat. 2. The oxygen saturation climbs. The room breathes again. And then the man on the bed, the man with the classified file, the man 3 different doctors had quietly decided was not going to make it to sunrise, opens his eyes. He looks directly at her. And in a voice that is barely sound at all, barely more than exhaled air shaped into syllables, he says 2 words. Phantom 2. She goes completely still. If you want to know what those 2 words mean, why 3 unmarked vehicles will be parked outside this hospital by morning, and what a classified operation in Kandahar in 2007 has to do with a night nurse in a VA ward 17 years later, stay right here until the end. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. Chapter 1. The night shift. Her name was Dara Voss, and she had worked the overnight shift at the Claremont, Virginia Medical Center for 4 years without anyone learning much of anything about her. That was intentional. She was 38 years old, medium height, with dark eyes that moved constantly and a stillness about her body that read as calm but was actually something else entirely. Something closer to readiness. She wore her hair pulled back in a way that suggested function over habit. She moved through the ward with an economy of motion that the other nurses sometimes noticed without being able to articulate why. She was never the fastest person in the room, but she was always the first one finished. She never raised her voice. She never fumbled. She never stood with her back to a door. Nobody asked about these things. People at the VA were generally good at not asking. The Claremont, Virginia Medical Center sat at the edge of a mid-sized city in the American Southwest. A building that smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet and the particular institutional staleness that accumulates in places where people are waiting for things they don't want to name. The overnight ward where Dara worked was the long-term care unit, patients who weren't going home anytime soon, patients whose conditions required watching, patients who had fallen through the administrative cracks between one kind of care and another. She had chosen this shift deliberately. The overnight hours meant fewer administrators, fewer physicians who wanted to demonstrate authority, fewer people in general. It meant she could do her job the way she needed to do it, which was quietly, thoroughly, and without interruption. Her colleagues on the night shift were a rotating cast of people she respected in the way you respect anyone who shows up consistently and does what they're supposed to do. There was Tomas, the overnight tech, who was studying for his RN boards and who asked Dara questions she always answered more completely than he expected. There was Lena, the charge nurse who had been at Claremont for 11 years and who ran the overnight ward with a brisk, practical authority that Dara found genuinely admirable. And there was Dr. Elliot Farr, the overnight attending, who was 32 years old, freshly out of residency, and who had decided in the first week of his tenure that Dara Voss was pleasant enough but fundamentally unremarkable. He had made this determination based on the fact that she did not seek his attention, did not flatter him, did not ask questions that would give him an opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge. He interpreted her self-sufficiency as a kind of intellectual limitation. He was wrong about this in every possible way, but he would not discover that for several more hours. The night Marcus Hale arrived on the ward, it was a Tuesday in November, and the desert wind was coming in cold off the mountains. Dara had been on shift for 3 hours. She was doing a medication check on a patient in room 14 when she heard the elevator doors open and the particular sound of a gurney with a stuck wheel. A sound she had memorized because it was the sound of something arriving in a hurry. She finished the medication check first. Then she walked to the nurse's station. Marcus Hale was 39 years old, though the chart made him look older. He was a former Navy SEAL, retired on a medical discharge 2 years prior, and he had been found that evening in his apartment by a neighbor who had noticed the lights were on at an unusual hour. He had been in septic shock, complicated by a perforated ulcer, complicated further by a prior injury to his left lung that had never fully healed, complicated further still by the fact that he had not seen a doctor in 14 months and had not told anyone he was feeling unwell because he was the kind of man who did not do that. He was 6'1" and had once been built like something structural. Now he was gray-faced and shaking on the gurney, and his blood pressure was reading numbers that made Tomas go very quiet when he saw them. Dr. Farr had reviewed the chart in the elevator and arrived on the ward with the look of someone who had already done the math and found the answer uncomfortable. He ordered the standard protocol: fluids, antibiotics, a surgical consult for the morning, and then stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed and said, in a voice pitched low enough that he thought only Lena could hear him, "Let's make him comfortable. I don't think we're looking at a long window here." Lena said nothing. She had learned, over 11 years, when to push back and when to let a doctor be wrong in peace. Dara heard him. She was standing 2 feet to his left, checking the 4-line, and she heard every word. She said nothing either. She finished checking the 4-line. She looked at Marcus Hale's face. The color of it, the tension around his eyes even in semi-consciousness, the way his jaw was set. She looked at the rise and fall of his chest, which was shallow and slightly asymmetric, the left side moving less than the right. She looked at his hands, which were scarred in specific ways. Not the random scarring of accidents or industrial work. The deliberate, patterned scarring of someone who had used their hands in very specific environments over a very long time. She knew those scars. She had seen hands like that before. She had, in fact, treated hands like that before, in conditions that bore no resemblance to this clean, fluorescent-lit room. She said nothing about any of this. She finished her assessment, noted 3 things in his chart that Dr. Farr had not noted, and went back to her other patients. For now. Chapter 2. What the chart doesn't say. By midnight, Marcus Hale was not improving. This was not a surprise to Dara, who had looked at the antibiotic protocol Dr. Farr had ordered and recognized that it was a reasonable first-line approach for a patient whose history they didn't fully know, and an insufficient approach for a patient whose history she was beginning to piece together from the evidence available to her. The chart said former SEAL. The chart said medical discharge. The chart said prior lung injury, mechanism unspecified. The chart said no current medications, no recent medical contact, no listed next of kin. The chart did not say what Dara was reading in the physical evidence. The particular pattern of scarring on his left flank. The faint, irregular discoloration along his collarbone that was consistent with a very specific kind of blast injury. The way his left lung was moving, or rather, the way it wasn't, that suggested the prior injury had not healed the way the chart seemed to assume it had. She had seen this before. Not in a textbook. In a place where there were no textbooks, where there was no chart, where the only information you had was what you could see and feel and hear and what your training told you it meant. At 12:15, she went to find Dr. Farr. He was at the nurse's station, writing notes, with the particular posture of someone who had settled into the assumption that the night was going to be uneventful. He looked up when she approached. He had a face that defaulted to mild condescension the way some faces default to smiling. Not malicious, just habitual. "Mr. Hale in room 7, Dara said. "His left lung isn't moving right. I think there's a complication from the prior injury that isn't reflected in the current treatment plan." Dr. Farr looked at her for a moment. "I reviewed the imaging. The imaging is from 2 years ago," she said. "And I don't think it's an infection issue. I think there's a mechanical component." He set down his pen. "What kind of mechanical component?" "I'd like you to come listen." He came. She could tell he was coming as a courtesy, not because he believed her, and she was fine with that. She needed him in the room, not convinced. He listened to Marcus Hale's chest. He looked at the monitors. He looked at Dara. He looked at the monitors again. "His SATs are dropping," he said, as if this were new information. "Yes," she said. "I'll order a chest X-ray. That'll take 40 minutes. He looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" She was very careful here. She had learned, over 4 years, how to suggest things in ways that physicians could receive without feeling managed. She laid out the clinical reasoning in the order that made sense to him, the asymmetric breath sounds, the history of blast injury, the pattern of the current presentation, and she watched him follow the logic to the conclusion she had already reached. "You think there's a loculated effusion," he said. "I think it's worth considering." He ordered the ultrasound. Took 20 minutes. The ultrasound confirmed what Dara had known from the moment she looked at Marcus Hale's chest. There was a significant fluid collection, walled off from a prior injury, that had been slowly compromising his breathing for months and had now reached a point of crisis under the additional stress of the sepsis. Dr. Farr ordered the drainage. He did it himself, which was the right call, and he did it competently, which she noted with genuine respect. When it was done and Marcus Hale's oxygen saturation began to climb, Dr. Farr stood at the bedside for a long moment. "Good catch," he said. It was not an apology. It was not a reckoning. It was two words that acknowledged something without examining it too closely, and Dara accepted them for what they were. "I'll keep watching him," she said. She did. Chapter 3. The hours before dawn. The thing about a body in crisis is that it doesn't recover in a straight line. It recovers in fits and retreats, in small victories followed by sudden reversals, in moments of apparent stability that can evaporate between one breath and the next. Dara knew this. She had known it long before she became a nurse. She checked on Marcus Hale every 20 minutes through the early morning hours. She adjusted his positioning. She monitored his fluid balance with the kind of attention that Tomas, watching from the doorway at one point, described to Lena as kind of intense. Lena had said, "She's always like that," in a tone that suggested she'd stopped trying to explain it. At 2:47 in the morning, something changed. Dara was in the room doing a routine check when she noticed the shift in his breathing. Not the mechanical issue they'd already addressed, but something else. Something in the rhythm. She had her hand on his wrist, not because the monitor wasn't doing its job, but because she had learned, in a context she never discussed, that monitors tell you what has already happened and hands tell you what is happening. His pulse was doing something specific. A pattern she recognized. She had seen this pattern twice before in her life. Both times had been in places with no electricity, no monitors, no clean floors. Both times she had done something that was not in any civilian nursing protocol, something she had learned from a special operations combat medic course that she had completed in 2005 under a name that was not Daravos. She looked at the door. Tomas was at the nurse's station. Lena was with another patient. Dr. Farr was in the break room. She made a decision. She positioned her hands, 2 fingers, right hand, placed at a specific intercostal space on the left side of his chest, not where the drainage had been done, but lower, at an angle that corresponded to a technique she had been taught by a flight surgeon named Carver who had since retired to Montana and who had told her, "You'll never need this. But if you do, you'll know." She applied pressure. Specific, calibrated, sustained. The monitor did something unexpected. The rhythm, which had been developing the precursor pattern she recognized, steadied. The threat that she had seen coming, a threat that was not in any standard textbook, that required a specific kind of knowledge to even recognize, receded. She held the pressure for 90 seconds. Then she released it gradually, the way Carver had shown her, the way she had practiced until it was part of her body's knowledge rather than her mind's. The monitor held. She was still standing there, both hands resting lightly on the bed rail, when she became aware that she was not alone. She looked up. Marcus Hale's eyes were open. Not the unfocused, half-conscious opening of a sedated patient responding to stimulation. Open. Present. Looking at her with a clarity that had no business being there given his current condition. A clarity that she recognized as the particular sharpness of someone who has trained their awareness to surface through pain and drugs and exhaustion because that awareness has, at some point in their life, been the difference between living and not. He was looking at her hands. Then he was looking at her face. His lips moved. She leaned in because the sound was barely there. 2 words. Phantom 2. The monitor beeped. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Dara did not move. She did not breathe. She stood at the bedside of a man she had never met in this life, in this hospital, in these names, and she felt something she had spent 4 years carefully not feeling. The precise, cold shock of being seen. Chapter 4. What Phantom 2 meant. She straightened up. She checked the monitor with her eyes, not her hands, because her hands were not entirely steady and she did not want them near anything that required precision right now. She made a note in his chart, clinical, factual, the kind of note that said nothing about what had just happened. Then she walked to the door of room 7, stepped into the hallway, and stood with her back against the wall for exactly 45 seconds. This was not a habit she had developed as a nurse. Phantom 2 was a call sign. Her call sign. It had been assigned to her in the spring of 2007, during a pre-deployment briefing for a joint special operations task force operating in southern Afghanistan. She had been 23 years old and had already completed 2 combat deployments as a 68W, a combat medic, with a specialty cross-training that had taken her into environments that most 68WS never saw. She had been attached to a SEAL team for a specific operation in the Kandahar province, and she had been given the call sign Phantom 2 because the team lead, a man named Chief Petty Officer Dale Rourke, had said she moved like she wasn't there until she needed to be. The operation had been classified at a level she was not going to think about in a VA hospital hallway. What she was going to think about was this: who else had known that call sign? The answer was a very short list. The team that had been on the ground that night in Kandahar. The task force commander. 2 intelligence officers whose names she had never been told directly. And the flight surgeon Carver, who had briefed her on the specific medical protocols for that mission, protocols that included the technique she had just used on Marcus Hale's chest. She went back to the nurse's station. She sat down. She pulled up Marcus Hale's chart and she read it again, more carefully this time, looking for the thing she had missed the first time because she hadn't been looking for it. There, in the prior injury section, left lung, blast injury, Kandahar province, 2007. She sat very still for a long moment. Then she thought he was there. He was on that team or connected to it. And he recognized the technique. Not the drainage, any physician could have done that. The other thing, the thing she had done after, the thing that Carver had taught her specifically for the kind of blast injury that left a specific kind of residual nerve damage that could trigger a specific kind of cardiac event under specific kinds of physiological stress. He recognized it because he had seen it before. In Kandahar. In 2007. In the dark, in the dirt. When she had done the same thing for a man who had been lying in the rubble of a compound wall, and whose heart had been doing exactly what Marcus Hale's heart had been doing 20 minutes ago. She did not know if Marcus Hale was that man. She had not seen his face that night. There had been no light, and she had been working by touch and training and the sound of his breathing. She had stabilized him and then moved to the next casualty, and then the extraction had happened in a controlled chaos that she had spent 17 years not revisiting. But he had been there, and he had seen her, or he had been told about her, or he had, in the haze of his current condition, recognized something in her hands that his body remembered even when his mind was elsewhere. Phantom 2. She needed to think about what came next. Chapter 5. Lena notices at 4 in the morning. Lena found Dara at the nurse's station with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Lena was 51 years old, had been a charge nurse for 15 years, and had developed the particular skill of reading her staff the way a ship's captain reads weather, not by looking directly at the thing but by watching what it did to the air around it. She sat down across from Dara. She did not say anything immediately. She poured herself coffee from the same pot. She looked at the monitors. She looked at Dara. Room 7. She said. It wasn't a question. He's stable, Dara said. I know he's stable. I checked 20 minutes ago. Lena wrapped both hands around her mug. Far told me about the effusion. Said it was your call. It was a clinical observation. Dara. Lena's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who had decided to say a thing. I've worked with you for 4 years. I've seen you catch things that attendings missed. I've seen you manage situations that should have required a physician and somehow didn't. I've never asked you about your background because you clearly don't want to talk about it, and that's your right. Dara looked at her coffee. But something happened in room 7 tonight, Lena said. And I need to know if it's going to affect my ward. He's stable, Dara said again. His vitals are improving. I think he'll make it to morning. That's not what I asked. A long pause. The monitor at the nurse's station showed a row of green lines, all of them steady, all of them doing what they were supposed to do. A patient said something to me, Dara said finally. Something from a long time ago. I wasn't expecting it. Something bad. Something complicated. Lena considered this. Does it affect your ability to care for him? Dara thought about this honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. No, she said. It doesn't. Okay. Lena stood up. Then keep watching him. And Dara. She paused at the edge of the nurse's station. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it by yourself. Dara looked up at her. It was a brief look, and it contained something that Lena would later describe to her husband as the most complicated thing she had ever seen in another person's face. Gratitude and grief and a very old, very practiced refusal, all at the same time. I know, Dara said. Lena went back to her rounds. Dara went back to room 7. Marcus Hale was awake. Not the brief, surfacing consciousness of before. Genuinely awake, eyes tracking, following her movement as she came through the door with a clinical steadiness that she matched with her own. She checked his vitals. She checked the 4. She did all of it without looking directly at him, and then she looked directly at him. You're stable, she said. Your oxygen is better. The fluid collection was drained. You're going to need surgery in the next day or 2 for the underlying issue, but you're going to make it. He said nothing for a moment. His voice, when it came, was rough and low. You used the Carver technique. She did not react. I used a clinical intervention appropriate to your presentation. The Carver technique, he said again. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just a statement offered flatly the way you state a fact you want acknowledged. She looked at him. Go to sleep, Mr. Hale. Marcus. Go to sleep. He did not go to sleep. But he also did not push further. He lay there looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had just confirmed something they had been uncertain about for a long time, and who was now deciding what to do with the confirmation. She stayed in the room for another 10 minutes, adjusting nothing that needed adjusting, before she trusted herself to leave. Chapter 6. Morning comes hard at 6:15 in the morning, with the night shift winding down and the desert sky going from black to a bruised purple outside the ward windows. Dara was doing her final rounds when Tomas found her in the hallway. There are vehicles in the parking lot, he said. She looked at him. His voice had a specific quality, not alarmed but uncertain, the tone of someone who has seen something they don't have a category for. What kind of vehicles? 3 of them. Dark. No markings. They've been there since about 5:30. He paused. The one in the middle has government plates. The other 2. He shook his head. I don't know. They're just sitting there. She nodded. Thanks, Tomas. She finished her rounds. She did it completely, thoroughly, because the patients on this ward had not stopped needing care because her past had arrived in the parking lot, and she was not going to shortchange them. She checked every room. She made every note. She handed off to the day shift nurse, a man named Garrett who she liked and trusted, with a full verbal report that included every relevant detail about Marcus Hale's overnight course. Then she went to the window at the end of the hall. 3 vehicles. Black, late-model SUVs, the kind that could belong to any number of federal agencies or could belong to none of them. 2 had no visible plates from this angle. The one in the middle, Tomas was right about the government plates, she could just make them out. They were not parked in a way that blocked the exits. That was intentional, she thought. A message. We're not here to contain. We're here to talk. She had approximately 20 minutes before the day attending arrived and the ward changed character entirely. She used 10 of them to go back to room 7. Marcus Hale was awake and had been for a while. Someone from the day prep team had brought him water, and he was holding the cup in both hands the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. They're here, she said. He looked at her. I know. How long have you known they'd come? Since I woke up last night. He set the cup down. Since I said your call sign and you didn't deny it. She sat down in the chair beside his bed, the visitor's chair, the one that family members sat in, the one she almost never used. She sat in it now because this was not a clinical conversation and she was done pretending it was. Tell me who's out there, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Some of them are people who want to thank you, he said. For Kandahar. For what you did that night. And the others? Another pause. Longer. There's a file, he said. From 2007. It was supposed to be destroyed. It wasn't. It has your name in it, Your real name, your operational details, your role in the mission. He looked at her steadily. Someone's been sitting on it. Using it. Using it how? Leverage. The operation had some complications that certain people would prefer stayed buried. Your involvement, a female combat medic attached to a SEAL team under a classified protocol that wasn't exactly authorized through the standard channels. That's the kind of detail that gives people options. She absorbed this. Options against who? Against the people who ran the operation. Against the task force commander. Against anyone connected to what happened that night. He paused. Against you if they needed it. She looked at the window. The desert light was fully up now, pale gold and flat, the kind of light that showed everything without flattering anything. Who has the file? Had, Marcus said. Past tense. That's why they're in the parking lot. Chapter 7. The parking lot. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, which took 3 minutes. She put on the clothes she'd arrived in. Dark pants, a gray shirt, boots that were more practical than the shoes most nurses wore. She put her badge in her bag. She took her bag to her locker and left it there. Then she walked out through the main entrance of the Claremont, Virginia Medical Center into the cold morning air. The 3 vehicles were arranged in a loose triangle in the far corner of the parking lot, away from the morning arrival traffic. As she walked toward them, the doors of the center vehicle opened. 2 people got out. A man and a woman, both in civilian clothes that had the particular fit of people who were not accustomed to civilian clothes. The man was in his 50s, with gray at his temples and the kind of posture that never fully leaves someone who has spent decades in uniform. The woman was younger, maybe 40, with a tablet in one hand and an expression of careful neutrality that Dara recognized as professional. The man looked at her as she approached. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, but a kind of confirmation. The look of someone who has been told a thing and is now seeing that the thing is true. Ms. Voss, he said. That depends on who's asking, she said. My name is Caldwell. I work for a department that doesn't have a sign on the door. He said it without apology or drama. Just fact. I was the Task Force Intelligence Officer for Operation Hollow Reach. Kandahar, 2007. She looked at him. She did not say anything. You were Phantom 2, he said. You were attached to the team under a protocol that was authorized at the level of the task force commander, which was not the level that it should have been authorized at. That created a paper problem. The paper problem was supposed to disappear. He paused. It didn't disappear. It ended up in the possession of a man named Greaves, Deputy Director Greaves, formerly of a certain agency, who used it as insurance for approximately 12 years. Insurance against what? Against the people who knew what he did during that operation. Caldwell's voice was level. Greaves made certain decisions during Hollow Reach that were not authorized by anyone. Decisions that cost lives. The team that was on the ground that night, the ones you pulled out, they were put in that position because of Greaves's decisions. He's been keeping the file to make sure no one who was there ever talked. The woman with the tablet spoke for the first time. My name is Reyes. I'm with the Inspector General's office. Mr. Greaves was arrested 48 hours ago. The file has been recovered and is in the process of being properly classified and sealed. She looked at Dara directly. Your involvement in the operation is being formally recognized and your records are being corrected to reflect your actual service history, which was expunged when the protocol was papered over. Dara stood in the parking lot in the cold morning air and felt the particular unreality of hearing bureaucratic language applied to things that had been, for her, entirely real and entirely physical, the dark, the rubble, the specific weight of a man's body that she was trying to keep alive with her hands. Marcus Hale, she said. What's his connection to Greaves? Caldwell and Reyes exchanged a look. Hale has been building a case against Greaves for 2 years, Caldwell said. Quietly. Through channels that were, let's say, unofficial. He got close enough that Greaves's people took notice. The condition he arrived in last night was not entirely the result of a neglected ulcer. She went very still. Someone did this to him. Someone accelerated it, Caldwell said carefully. He was already unwell. But yes, there were people who would have preferred he didn't reach a hospital. She thought about Marcus Hale lying on the gurney with his gray face and his blood pressure numbers and his lung that wasn't moving right, and she thought about Dr. Farr saying let's make him comfortable, and she thought about herself standing in that room at 2:47 in the morning, doing something no civilian nurse would know to do, keeping alive a man who had been trying to do something that mattered. "He's going to need protection," she said. "He has it," Reyes said. "As of 2 hours ago. He's going to need surgery. We have a surgical team coming in. He's going to need—" She stopped, looked at them both. "He's going to need someone who knows his actual medical history, not the chart. The real one." Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. "We were hoping you might be willing to consult on that." She looked back at the hospital building. The morning shift was fully underway now, the parking lot filling with cars, people moving through the entrance in the ordinary rhythm of a day beginning. Somewhere on the 4th floor, in room 7, Marcus Hale was lying in a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and institution, alive because of something she had done with her hands in the dark. "I have a shift tonight," she said. "We know," Reyes said. "I'll be here." She turned and walked back toward the entrance. Chapter 8. What Farr learned the day shift brought Dr. Elliot Farr back to the ward at 7 in the morning, and by 7:30 he had reviewed the overnight notes on Marcus Hale and was standing at the nurse's station with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that keeps coming out wrong. He found Dara in the break room. She was still there. She had not gone home, which Garrett had noticed and not commented on, because Garrett was perceptive enough to understand when someone needed to stay. "The overnight notes on Hale," Farr said. "Yes. You documented a secondary intervention at 2:47. He had the chart open on his tablet. Bilateral intercostal pressure application. Sustained 90 seconds. Left lateral position." He looked up. "That's not in any protocol I know." "It worked," she said. "That's not." He stopped. "Try it again." "Where did you learn that?" She looked at him. She thought about what Caldwell had said in the parking lot. "Your records are being corrected to reflect your actual service history." She thought about 4 years of working in this building as someone no one knew anything about, for years of catching things and fixing things and staying quiet about how she knew what she knew. She thought about Marcus Hale saying Phantom 2 in a voice that was barely sound. "I was a combat medic," she said. "Before this." Farr looked at her.
"À combat médic."
"Special Operations Attachment. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. I was cross-trained in advanced trauma protocols that aren't part of the standard civilian curriculum." She said it plainly, without emphasis, the way you state facts that have always been true and are simply now being stated. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him reorganizing things, not just the overnight notes, but the 4 years of small moments he had filed under unremarkable and was now pulling back out and looking at differently. "The effusion," he said. "You knew before the ultrasound." "I suspected." "The secondary intervention." He looked at the tablet. "You knew his heart was going to do something." "I recognized a pattern." "From combat." "Yes." He set the tablet down on the break room table. He sat down across from her, which was not something he had ever done before. He was a standing at the doorway kind of person, a leaning against the counter kind of person, someone who kept a certain physical distance that reinforced the hierarchy of the room. Sitting down was different. Sitting down was something else. "I told Lena he wasn't going to make it," he said. "I know. I was wrong." "Yes." He looked at the table. "I've been wrong about other things too." He said it quietly, not quite looking at her, in the tone of someone who is making a confession they haven't rehearsed. "I've been dismissing your clinical judgment for months. I thought," he stopped. "It doesn't matter what I thought." "It matters a little," she said. Not cruelly, just accurately. He looked up.
"I'm sorry."
She nodded. She accepted it the way she accepted most things, completely without performance, and then moved on. "Hale is going to need a surgical consult this morning," she said. "There's a team coming in. I'd like you to be involved in the handoff." "Of course." He picked up the tablet, hesitated.
"Dara."
"The people in the parking lot this morning. You saw them. Hard to miss," Lena said. He stopped. "Are you okay?" It was a simple question. It was the kind of question that, in 4 years, no one at this hospital had asked her in quite that way. Not as a check-in, not as a formality, but as a genuine inquiry into her actual state. She thought about how to answer it honestly. I will be, she said. Chapter 9. The surgical consult and the reckoning. The surgical team that arrived at Claremont, Virginia at 9 that morning was not the standard consult team. They arrived in 2 of the 3 vehicles from the parking lot, and they moved through the hospital with a quiet efficiency that made the administrative staff at the front desk look at each other with the particular expression of people who know something unusual is happening but have been given no useful information about what. Dara was present for the consult. She stood at the edge of the room and answered questions when she was asked them, and the questions she was asked were specific and technical and required the kind of knowledge she had spent 4 years not demonstrating in this building. She answered them anyway. The surgical team lead, a woman named Dr. Okafor who had a manner so precise it was almost architectural, listened to Dara's overnight account with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what they were hearing. The Carver technique, Dr. Okafor said at one point, not looking up from her notes. Yes, Dara said. You were trained by Carver directly? Yes. Then you know the post-procedure monitoring protocol.
Ido.
Dr. Okafor looked up. She looked at Dara with an expression that was entirely different from the way Dr. Farr had looked at her, or the way anyone at Claremont had looked at her in 4 years. It was the look of a peer, of someone who was calibrating not upward or downward but across at the same level. Good, she said. I'd like you in the room. Farr, standing to Dara's left, said nothing. But she saw his jaw shift slightly, not resentment, she thought. Something closer to recalibration. Marcus Hale's surgery was scheduled for that afternoon. Before they prepped him, Dara went in alone. He was more alert than he had any right to be given the previous night, which she attributed partly to his physiology, the particular resilience of someone who had spent years training their body to recover, and partly to the fact that he had clearly been waiting. They talked to you, he said. Yes. Caldwell. And Reyes. He nodded slowly. Reyes is good people. Caldwell, he paused. Caldwell has been trying to fix this for a long time. He's one of the reasons Greaves is in custody. You trust him? Enough. He looked at her. Do you? She thought about it. Enough, she said. He almost smiled. It was brief and complicated, the smile of someone who has been in pain for a long time and is only now beginning to consider the possibility of something else. Kandahar, he said. You don't have to. I was the one you stabilized. In the rubble. He said it simply, like setting something down. I didn't see your face. It was dark and I was not in good shape. But I felt what you did. And I remembered it. The specific pressure, the specific angle. I'd never felt anything like it before or since. He paused. When I was building the case against Greaves, I started looking into the operation. The full record. And I found a reference to a combat medic attached to the team, call sign Phantom 2, who had used an unauthorized protocol to stabilize a critical casualty. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know if you were still alive. I didn't know if I'd ever find you. She stood at the bedside in the morning light and felt the 17 years between that night and this one. The weight of them, the distance, the particular loneliness of carrying something that no one around you can see. You found me, she said. You found me, he said. Last night. Again. She looked at the monitor. His vitals were steady. His color was better. He looked like a man who was going to live, which was different from how he had looked 12 hours ago. The surgery is this afternoon, she said. Dr. Okafor is good. You're going to be fine. I know. He paused. Will you be there? Yes. After. She looked at him. The question had layers she was not going to address in a pre-surgical consult, and they both knew it. One thing at a time, she said. He nodded. One thing at a time. Chapter 10. After the surgery took 4 hours and 12 minutes. Dara was present for all of it, standing where Dr. Okafor had placed her, doing what she was asked to do, which was monitor specific parameters that required the specific knowledge she had and doing it with the focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything. When it was over and Marcus Hale was in recovery, she stood in the scrub room and washed her hands and looked at the water running over them and thought about hands. What they remember, what they carry, what they can do in the dark when there is nothing else. Lena found her in the hallway outside the recovery room at 6 in the evening, which was 1 hour before Dara's night shift was scheduled to begin. You've been here for 12 hours, Lena said. 14, Dara said. Go home. I will. After I check on him. Lena looked at her for a long moment. The people from this morning. Reyes came and spoke to me. She told me some things. She paused. She told me enough. Dara waited. For years, Lena said. You've been here 4 years and I never. She stopped. She was not a woman who lost her composure easily, and she was not losing it now, but there was something in her voice that was working to stay level. I never knew what you were carrying. You weren't supposed to.
No.
Lena was quiet for a moment. But I'm glad you're here. I want you to know that. Whatever brought you to this ward, whatever you were running from or running to, I'm glad you're here. The patients are glad, even if they don't know why. She paused.
I'm glad.
Dara looked at her. The complicated thing was in her face again. The gratitude and the grief and the practiced refusal. And this time the refusal was a little smaller than it had been at 4 in the morning. A little more willing to let something through. Thank you, she said. She went in to check on Marcus Hale. He was out of anesthesia and groggy, which was appropriate. He turned his head when she came in. He did not say anything. She checked his vitals, checked the surgical site, checked the drain. All of it exactly as it should be. She was at the door when he said, quietly, What do you do now? She turned. Tonight? Night shift.
No.
He looked at her. With the file corrected. With Greaves in custody. With all of it. He paused. What do you do now? She thought about this. She thought about 4 years of overnight shifts and patients nobody else was watching and small interventions that made the difference between one outcome and another. She thought about a ward full of veterans who had been through things that most people couldn't imagine, being cared for by someone who had been through things that most people couldn't imagine, and how there was a kind of rightness in that which she had never been able to explain to anyone. She thought about Marcus Hale saying you found me and meaning it in both directions. The same thing I've been doing, she said. He looked at her. Here. Something settled in his face. The particular settling of someone who has been uncertain about something important and has now received an answer they can build on. Okay, he said. Go to sleep, she said. This time he did. She walked out of the recovery room and down the hall toward the nurse's station, where Tomas was already setting up for the night shift, where the monitors showed their steady green lines, where the ward was doing what it always did in the hours between day and dark. Breathing in, breathing out, holding on. She sat down. She picked up the first chart. She began. The 3 vehicles were gone from the parking lot. The desert night was coming in cold off the mountains. Somewhere in the building, a man who had been dying 12 hours ago was sleeping in a clean bed with a surgical drain and a stable blood pressure and a future that had not existed yesterday. She had not saved him because she was trying to be seen. She had not stayed quiet for 4 years because she was trying to hide. She had done both things for the same reason she did everything, because it was what the situation required, because it was what she knew how to do, because there were people in front of her who needed something and she had it to give. That was the whole of it. That was all it had ever been. The monitor beeped. She looked up. Room 12. A small change in the rhythm. Nothing urgent but worth watching. She stood up and walked toward it without hurrying, without hesitation, without anything in her face that the other nurses would have been able to name. Just the night nurse. Moving through the ward like she wasn't there until she needed to be. Phantom 2. Still here. If the story moved you, if you felt something in those quiet moments between the crisis and the reckoning, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Stories about people who carry more than they show, who do more than they're given credit for, who show up in the dark when everyone else has gone home. You don't want to miss them. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how far this one travels.